welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I can't talk today. Happy March. Happy Women's History Month. And I am here with Lily Hirsch, and this is your second time coming on Turn the Page, right?
Yes, I'm so glad to be back. Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy to have you back. And this was actually something, so the last time we spoke about the Weird Al book, Weird Al Seriously, which was really good. And we kind of talked a little bit about the movie, which came out. And before we started recording, we were both discussing our favorite parts. See the Weird Al movie, folks. But another thing was that I noticed that Lily was coming out with this book, Can't Stop the Grrrls, Grrrls. Three R's. No, Grrrls. And it's about confronting sexist labels in music from Ariana Grande to Yoko Ono. And when I saw that, I remember I immediately said to you, I'm like, Lily, please come back for that one because that is my jam. So why don't you tell us a little bit about this book?
Okay, so this book, it started actually with Yoko Ono, and it started during the pandemic. I think you know that I am interested in issues around gender, and even in the Weird Al book, I have a chapter about how Weird Al kind of complicates gender and sometimes undermines toxic masculinity, and I just loved that. I've also written before. I wrote a biography of an early musicologist who was a woman and faced gender discrimination, and so this is something that's important to me, this issue, and of course it's personal. And so I really dove in with this book. During the pandemic, I was making a lot of questionable decisions when it came to my viewing habits and reading habits as well. And there were so many references to being a Yoko Ono as a negative, this label over and over again. It was like I couldn't get away from it. So I started just focusing on that. How could a person's name become an insult like this? So that was the first label. And I looked into her history and into her reception and into her musical aspirations and her musical agenda, which was very academic. She was in these real experimental circles, and yet she gets grouped with the Beatles and discussed within that lens. And it doesn't mash with that pop culture standard, and her music is insulted. Not only that, she is thought to have broken up the band, which was not at all the case. And that new docuseries that Peter Jackson came out with, that was amazing to watch because you see George Harrison just casually quit. Quitting was in the air, and it wasn't Yoko Ono. She was just casually sitting there. She would have been scrolling on her iPhone if she'd had one back then. Anyway, so it started with that, and then it blossomed. I started looking at other musicians that were called a Yoko Ono, or Courtney Love, even Meghan Markle, not a musician. There's so many, any sort of negative woman that comes in contact with some sort of famous male, it can be subject to this label. And then there are all the other labels. So then I just started going from there to other labels like diva, Ariana Grande and Mariah Carey are both linked with that label. And I also looked at labels like liar, snake with Taylor Swift, and of course the label crazy with Britney Spears. This particular label infuriates me because it's often a means of easy dismissal, not looking at the actual problem. And then there's the double standard where a woman, an artistic woman, can be called crazy, where an artistic man will be called a genius.
Yeah, it's all very valid and just a really good time to have a book like this. So you said that you started this during the pandemic. So what were first of all, like the structure of the book? It starts with they're going to crucify her, which is obviously it's a reference to the Ballad of John and Yoko, which is I really do love that song. It's such a good song, and I know it had its controversies back when it came out, but it is such a good song. But I liked that that's kind of how you opened it. So,
Mhm.
why did you decide to begin there specifically?
Well, it was that label with Yoko Ono that I just couldn't get away from. It just came up so many times. And some of the insults are, kind of easy and casual and lazy, and some of them are so ugly and racist and upsetting. It's such an array. I've also noticed, especially online, that any pushback against this myth that Yoko Ono was somehow disruptive or broke up the Beatles, people can't handle it. I have been insulted even bringing this up. It's almost like this myth is so deeply entrenched in our culture that pushing back against that is somehow challenging to
Oh, it's
someone's.
crazy. It's absolutely nuts in
Yes.
every possible way.
Yes, and it's around this idea of breaking up the Beatles, which was in the air at the time, had nothing to do with Yoko Ono. And it's also around her music. And she was very educated and knowledgeable about music, and she was in the same circles as these experimental avant-garde composers like John Cage. Now, when I was a music history professor, John Cage was a composer I taught every single semester. He's respected, he's known, and he did this sort of challenging of what is music and what is noise. Yoko Ono does the same thing, and it's awful. People make fun of it. It's in a brutal, brutal way. And I'm thinking of the Bill Burr sketch. There's this famous Bill Burr sketch that's so ugly that takes on her music specifically.
Yeah, and actually, Junk, is he the one who had like that, like four some odd minutes of silence? Was that?
Yes, that's
Yes,
John
yes,
Cage.
yes. Yeah,
Exactly.
we have a librarian who's in my department actually who has a tattoo of that time on her arm because that's a very important piece to her.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah. So aside from Yoko Ono, I'm pleased as punch to see that you went and talked about Britney Spears. There has been
Hmm.
so much sort of like reclaiming of what happened to her, especially what was it? It was like circa 2007, 2008
Hmm.
when her marriage was falling apart and
Hmm.
she shaved her head and like the paparazzi were all over her, and it's very easy to just sort of write her off and people were like, oh well, she's crazy, she's unhinged, she's this, she's
Right.
that. But like I remember being like, man, she's going through it. Like here
Yeah.
you have somebody who was like sexualized from age 16
Right.
and it has been under a microscope, and now she's still under a microscope, and
Yes.
her mental breakdown is forever going to be in the public eye. Now, it
Hmm.
was always also kind of fashionable to bash Britney's music. It was very much like it was pop in the
Yes.
purest sense of pop, whether or not you liked it or not.
Yeah.
Again, you have this girl who is like just about of legal age of consent being put in pleather and
Yeah.
yeah, so that was a whole other thing altogether. And then you have her mental breakdown. Now, like I said, a lot of people have been kind of coming around, and also, just like to the catchiness of her music to begin with. Um,
Yeah.
how did you know that Britney was going to be the next step? And as a musicologist, how did you sort of approach
Hmm.
this?
Well, it's interesting. One chapter kind of led to the other, and there is kind of an arc to it because we start with Yoko Ono, and then I talk about Courtney Love, who was also called a Yoko. And believe it or not, Britney Spears was called a Yoko as well when she was dating Justin Timberlake. So she came.
Right. Yeah, there's the whole Cry Me a River thing.
Yes, so
Yeah.
she came up when I was thinking about Yoko, and then of course that label crazy drove me crazy. Not to be flippant, but I remember too those narratives back then, and I was studying music at the time in a kind of classical tradition, and I remember insults around Britney Spears, and I remember feeling uncomfortable. but also this was so prevalent that I thought, okay, I guess she is these negative things. You know, it's interesting when these ideas are so in the public view, so in the media. It's confusing. It's almost like this collective gaslighting. I feel like I've been waking up from all of this slowly, where it felt wrong at the time, and now I see just how truly, truly wrong it was. She was sexualized, like you say. Some of the interviews I looked at now are wild, where older men are directly asking about her breasts or if she's
Right.
had sex. It's disgusting.
And then there's like the whole, what was it, that famous that famous interview where they're like something about like Pepsi, and she's like, what do you mean? Like, what kind of Pepsi do I like? Pepsi's Pepsi. I mean, like the stupidest, most
It's
insulting
wild.
questions. Yeah.
It's wild, and no one really knew what was going on with her. People are calling her crazy, but they didn't know her struggles. And I, you know, we still don't fully know what kind of diagnosis there was there, even though people are so offhandedly talking about her, quote unquote, as crazy. But I do remember that picture of her shaved head, her mad, her with the umbrella. I remember that very clearly from the time. What I didn't know was the context of that night she was trying to see her kids, her young kids. And I'm a mother, so this stuck with me, actually learning the story of how she was trying to get through at Kevin Federline's to see her kids, and she was turned away. And she was frustrated, and she was mad, and she was being chased by paparazzi. She stopped at a Jiffy Lube, and one of those paparazzi, he was there. He tried to talk to her, ask her another question, and that's when she used the umbrella and got mad. And when you put that into context and think about that as a mother, it's like, yeah, I mean, yeah, it makes sense. And that's something else. I didn't fully bring it out in the book, but that point of being a mother actually seems to be a tipping point for a lot of this labeling, not only as a woman, but also as a mom. And you see that with Britney Spears. That was the point of some of the very worst criticism around her body when she performed at the VMAs. And that also happened to Courtney Love. I don't know if you can hear that scratching. That's my dog. Okay, we'll just ignore that. So it seems like that point of becoming a mother, which is already so difficult, becomes this point of pile on often in the media. And I was just waiting for it and wondering what was going to happen when Rihanna performed at the Super Bowl. Becomes almost predictable, some of these disgusting patterns, especially after writing this book.
I do want to talk about Courtney Love, but I also, one thing that I really want to talk about also is the whole thing with Kesha, because, you know, that to me, like I was following that whole thing with her case against Dr. Luke.
Yeah.
And she was, again, like she's sitting there sobbing in court, and somehow she's the one who should have known better. And it's just, you know, and her music is terrible and blah blah blah. Like, no, like let's look at this, you know, let's look at this the
Kesha case it's really hard to, it was hard to write. I'm sure it's hard to read that particular chapter, and it's so different than some of these other examples because there is some sort of rehabilitation right now for Britney Spears, although there is still constant scrutiny. I thought people had kind of gotten the picture, and we're seeing these stories over and over about Britney Spears' current mental state. I can't believe it's happening again. But with Kesha, it's not the same. I want her to make some sort of amazing comeback. But she's still so tied to that story, unfortunately. And Dr. Luke, when you look at any of the statements or any of anything, even if you don't believe her, which this happens to women who were abused, they're assumed the liar.
Several other artists have said the same thing about her.
Yes, there's all kinds of evidence. But even if you put that aside, the fact that he keeps her under contract, he won't just let her go. This is not a nice person. There's just no argument that this is a decent human being. I don't even know what to say about that. I'm still angry when I think about that particular chapter, that I want to see Kesha just live her life in peace.
Yeah, no, me too. And then I do also, I want to get back a little bit, also just talk about, Taylor Swift is another one who gets although it's interesting that she was the one who kind of like somehow got it back and
Yeah.
re-released her records, which was
Yes.
pretty cool.
Very cool. That was a real power move. So her catalog was sold to someone she really despised, and it was quite upsetting. And she did this power move where she's re-recording her music, and that's amazing. The way she's able to continually fight back and come out on top, the way she did with the Reputation tour after being called a snake and all of that, it's really remarkable. And I think people ignore how remarkable it is because she is this very pretty, traditionally pretty, white, privileged sort of looking person. But that doesn't take away from the fact that she has had to overcome an awful lot. And any woman who remains in the public eye doing her music is extraordinary.
No, I definitely agree. But I did want to talk about Courtney Love because
Mhm.
she was, I guess, the closest in my generation we had to the person who was called a Yoko Ono. And
Yeah,
ah, man, I think like, what, one thing that I recall very specifically is that like Tori Amos of all people wrote a song, like a takedown song of her, and like that was pretty brutal.
yeah.
And like Tori Amos is considered, like a feminist icon, and when you kind of look at it, you're just like,
Yeah, yeah, women don't always support each other. I found that with the Taylor Swift chapter and Kim Kardashian. Kim Kardashian knows about being trolled. She knows about being harassed. And the fact that she went after Taylor Swift the way she did, that's pretty,
oh,
she should know better.
yeah, 100%. And actually thinking about Tori Amos specifically, who has that song Cornflake Girl, which is about women tearing each other down, it's disappointing
Yeah.
when when you're just like, oh, I think
Yes.
the song was called Professional Widow, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, some
Yeah.
female musicians just become these perennial punching bags, and it just becomes accepted. It's like they're no longer people. They're just discounted completely. And the abuse Courtney Love endured is just wild. When I was finding videos online, like roasts and things that dealt with her, the insults were so ugly and gross. Um, Somehow dressed up as comedy when these are not jokes, and you saw that with Yoko Ono too, like racism, just such ugliness.
Well, yeah,
um,
for sure. I mean, like they could just as easily have said the same things about Linda McCartney, and while some people claim that they did, it wasn't the same. Like
no,
not even slightly.
no, and women don't always have each other's back. Like I said, Marianne Faithfull is another example. She should know
Oh
better, and
yeah.
she was a part of one of these very wild, ugly tales around her sexuality, with this story that I don't even think I can repeat it on this
It's yeah,
podcast.
no, that was that no, I know
Such
exactly.
an ugly one.
I know the story, and
I'll skip it, but she
yeah.
was really maligned in that way. And then she talks about some of these younger musicians as being slutty. It is disappointing.
I mean, like I said, I love that I don't want to go over too much because I think people really will like this. Why did you choose the title? I mean,
Yeah.
again, from the 90s myself, when you see girls written this way, you think like Riot Girls.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Titles are fun. I love coming up with titles. Sometimes my titles don't make the cut, and they end up being a very long process. My book, Weird Al Seriously, that was actually my first idea. And it stuck, which was amazing. That doesn't normally happen. This book went through a lot of different titles. The first one I had that I thought was kind of clever was a play on the Beatles album Let It Be. I called it Let Her Be. But if you say it quickly, it sounds like the letter B, which was not going to work.
And that was also a Sesame Street parody of Let It Be, was letter
Oh
B.
no! Well, there
Yeah.
was, oh, I didn't even, oh gosh. Well, there's so many reasons why that title did not work. So this Can't Stop the Girls is actually a play first on the song by BB Rexa, You Can't Stop the Girl, which is a great power song. Then I've got the 3 R's in girls. We've got the growl, giving the girls back their roar. And that is a play on Riot Girls. That history is amazing. It's also a play on the Lizzo song Girls, which has the 3 R's. So I had a lot of history kind of rolled into that title.
So let's talk a little bit again, like, there's a lot to unpack. I think people would really love this book, but I also want to know about your foreword and
Oh
your
my gosh.
afterword.
Ugh.
What? How was that? That's like, I'm starstruck just reading who did them. Tell us
I
about that.
I agree. I feel starstruck all the time. I'm supposed to do book readings. I don't even want to read the pages I wrote. I want to read what these other amazing women wrote. Yes, actually, this foreword by Michelle and Cello is so beautiful and lyrical. It sounds like music. And when I reached out for this foreword, and I was amazed that she agreed to do it just because I too was starstruck. But when she turned it in, I read it and I teared up. This last bit of it is so beautiful. I don't know if I can read these last 2 lines.
Are you gonna try?
I want to.
Yeah,
It was
do it.
so
We want to
good.
hear it.
I love it. Okay, so the last bit that she writes, it's just one of my favorite passages in the whole book. She writes, "The work stands tall no matter the gender of the person who has created it. But the work of women stands tallest because it was often not meant to stand at all. My belief is that we must create it, record it, promote it, perform it for ourselves, of ourselves, and they will come. It is a terrible gift, the requirement to make the space ourselves, for ourselves, but it is the only way the space will come, and it is the only way it will be ours."
Wow. Yeah.
It gives me shivers every time. So that was amazing. And then I about the same time, I reached out to Amy Ray of the Indigo Girls. Obviously, I'm a Lilith Fair fan, so I was thinking of,
Hello.
yes, I've got
Me
my,
too.
yes. And the Indigo Girls are legendary. I'm waiting for a full book about them. They've
Are you
been
gonna write
this,
it? Because
I
you
would
should.
love to, and believe me, I brought it up. We will see. They're just legendary, and they've had such a long career, and these early icons, out as gay in the public eye, and that's a whole other. There are so many different aspects of gender discrimination and discrimination period that I could have gone into. I realize I could have written more about motherhood. I could have written more about fat phobia. I started to write a bit about it when I was dealing with Britney Spears, and then I realized this is going to be a whole book, just that issue, because there's so much attention on female bodies, women's bodies. I could have done more about what it's like to be out as gay or trans, and deal with that in the public eye. That is probably a second book, another book. There were so many. Ageism, that was another one I keep wishing I had done more with ageism. But these are going to have to be books for the future. But getting Amy Ray, sorry, I got off the topic, but getting an afterword by Amy Ray of the Indigo Girls, I'm still starstruck. I just love saying it.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And I just, it's really just, this was such a fun, fresh take on music, on just how women are portrayed. Was there anything that you wanted? Well, you just said pretty much like some of the stuff you really kind of wanted to get into and didn't have time to.
Yeah.
What's your next destination then?
I'm not totally sure. I have wanted to write about ageism, all of these headlines around Madonna, that happened, that all of that was kind of happening as this book, I was finishing up. But that could have been a whole second area. And when I think about it, that's been a focus on Madonna since forever. When she performed the halftime show at the Super Bowl in 2012, there was talk then about her being too old, even though there were men so much older than her that had performed at the Super Bowl. So she's been dealing with this around her, how she looks and how she's aging for so long. It's the most repetitive, boring story, but it's one that women deal with. How do you remain active in music and age? Apparently we're not allowed to do that. And I'm an aging woman, so that strikes a certain chord and makes me think about writing a whole book about aging in music. So I'm not totally sure what my next project is, but I'm definitely exploring a lot of different options, because the prejudice and discrimination musicians deal with is just endless, and there's so many new and even more disgusting categories and labels that keep coming up.
Lily Hirsch, thank you so much. This was a great chat. Whatever you come up with next, please reach out to us, because I would absolutely love to have you back on.
Thank you so much. I definitely will. It's always nice talking with you.
And if you want, could you give maybe 3 female musicians that you wish more people knew about?
Ooh, that's a good one. Well, I've personally been revisiting this Lilith Fair playlist. There's so many musicians there to explore that people knew more about. I've been recently playing around with Blackpink. I don't know if you know them, but I think they're pretty well known. They probably don't need my help. I have also been listening to a friend of mine. She's a composer that went to graduate school with me. Her name's Caroline Melanie, and she just came out with an album. So she's working in the world of classical music, which has its own baggage around gender, but she keeps putting out amazing music, and she's just one of the most brilliant musicians I know. So I'm personally listening to her album right now. I guess that's my playlist right now. But there's so many interesting young musicians. The Lindas, that's a fun.
I love the Lindas, and they really came. I mean, they've been around, but like that video of them in the library as a librarian.
Yes. Oh yes.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's so funny because there was an artist, and she right before the pandemic, she came back she was always sort of niche, and she was really more popular around like the Maryland area, but her moniker is Mary Prankster, and she's super, super fun. And her new album, again, it's not that new anymore, but it was really good. So there's her. I wish more people understood Fiona Apple and just how talented she is.
She's amazing.
She's another one who's been very, the mental health issues are a thing that people talk about. And of course, when she came out with Criminal, everybody just wants to talk about how she looked in her underwear emaciated. She is a fabulous, fabulous performer, an amazing musician, and she comes from a musical family.
Yeah, she's really, it'd be fun to write a book about her. I think she's fascinating, and I love some of the humor she plays around with.
So much, yeah.
Yes, that video, I don't know if you saw this video where it's her singing.
And Zach Galifianakis.
Yes,
that was very funny. Yeah.
I just loved that. Yeah, she's amazing.
And, it's so funny, but like recently I've been revisiting the Go-Go's.
Yes, I love that. I love that we're going back and seeing some of these. It feels like we're going back, but these musicians, these women in music are still around. They're still performing. They're still doing amazing things. A lot of that Lilith Fair playlist, those women are still making music, and it's incredible. So I feel like I'm going back, but really I'm not. They're still here. That's the thing. It's this ageism in music. You think they're gone once they hit a certain age, but that's not the case. And that's some rich, rich music.
Lily Hirsch, thank you so much. This was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast, and we are going to close this chapter.
Thank you.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.